From the Toronto Star, I'm Raju Mudhar, and this matters. It is interesting to think about how this pandemic has changed the meaning of certain terms. A few months ago, hub city was most commonly used as an airport term, which means the place where an airline flew most of its flights out of. But now, it is a term that has been co-opted by sports. While it is not quite official, it has been known for a while that the NHL will be choosing Toronto and Edmonton as its hub cities for its return-to-play plans and the eventual playoffs. The official announcement is coming soon, but shortly we will see NHL players start to make the trek up to Canada. Several North American leagues are all attempting to return to play, with Major League Soccer already back, the NBA setting up shop in Florida, while Major League Baseball has its own plans, which diverges completely from those first three. Will these hub city bubble plans work? Will the athletes be kept safe? Will we actually see some games? There's an old saying that you can never give Canadians too much hockey, and that will be put to the test, as if this gets off the ground, there could be 4 games a day. It actually took a lot for the NHL to get here, and to discuss that, we are joined by Kevin McGran, who covers the Leafs and the NHL for the Toronto Star. He's here to tell us everything we need to know about the NHL's Hub Cities plan. Kevin, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure always.
So Kevin, we've been hearing about this for a while, but the official announcement is about to come, or is here. What took so long with this Hub Cities plan?
Well, there's a lot of moving targets, I guess. I mean, there is so much. I mean, players have to get themselves back into shape. So there's a timing thing for what works for the fastest players can get themselves into shape. Another part of it was like, what's in it for the players to even play? I mean, by the letter of the law, a lot of them should have been free agents on July 1st and signing with new teams. So they had to find a way to make it in the players' best interest to play A, through a pandemic, and B, essentially for no money. They're going to increase the playoff pool, but that's about it. Players have been paid and they owe money back to the owners. So there had to be find a reason for the players to play beyond goodwill and let's crown a champion and finish the season, because a lot of their contracts expired. So what was in it for the players? Well, for the players, there was a new collective bargaining agreement that they were working on all along. They'd been making great progress, but they needed to refine an extension on the CBA and make it worth the players' while. Players have problems with how they get paid, a thing called escrow, which holds back money, how the salary cap works. So there's a whole bunch of issues that they wanted. They basically, Donald Fear, the executive director of the NHLPA, used this piece of leverage that he had in terms of the league wanting to finish the season to get for the players a better collective bargaining agreement extension, which ultimately they did. But there were so many moving pieces. I'm actually impressed that they got it done as quickly as they have got it done. From my understanding, the league wanted a summertime tournament as opposed to a fall tournament, in part because the window for television is there. I mean, the Olympics are gone. NBC owns the rights to hockey and the Olympics, so they have the opening on the NBC schedule to fill. And in part because the epidemiological experts were saying the summertime would be the best. The second wave will come in the fall. So get this done. Well, you can still get this done. So that's why the summertime matters to the NHL. I mean, I actually don't think it took a long time. I think I'm actually impressed. They got so much done in terms of a safety plan, a hub city plan, working with various levels of governments, working with teams, working with the Players Association to even get this done at all, I think was pretty impressive.
So we've been hearing for a while it's going to be Edmonton and Toronto. For a while, it seemed like Vegas was a lock, but now it's an all-Canadian duo. Was this really, like that choice of the Canadian cities, a case of the ballooning numbers in the U.S., or was there something about these sites?
Well, I mean, the NHL basically chose the sites. Every team was invited to put a proposal forward to be a hub city. And in the early goings, Edmonton probably put together the best package. But of course, Edmonton's problem is that it's Edmonton. And with players who get to decide where they're going to play, actually want to go to Edmonton. And that's why Vegas was so far out in front, because at the time, you know, the bug was under control there. It seemed like a great idea. You know, you could sort of hub off a whole casino and they could have all their entertainment and their meals all in one place close to the rink. And they'd be in Vegas, they'd be in the sun, they'd be in a resort. They're giving up a fair bit of their freedom to play in this for 2-3 months if they're going to be the Cup champion. So may as well make it as welcome for them as possible. Plus, Vegas has a certain panache to it. Hockey being played in Vegas, there was certain panache, pizzazz to the whole idea of the Stanley Cup tournament being played there, as well as one other city. So that's why Vegas was the forerunner. But ultimately what happened is COVID is out of control in most of the American cities. The players do care about their safety and the safety of others. And that's why Toronto and Edmonton sort of jumped to the forefront. The bug is under control in those two cities. They have everything you need. They have all the practice facilities you're going to need. Toronto and Edmonton have nice hotels. And it's not like they're going to be tourists. So for the guys that are from Toronto, they're not really missing out on doing touristy things in Toronto. There's a lot of them from Toronto. They know what Toronto's all about. It'll be easier for them to stay in hotel rooms and just be hockey players. They don't have to worry about what they're missing necessarily because they've seen it before and they'll see it again.
Can you talk to us about how this is going to work? How many teams? And it's looking like, 4 games a day?
Yeah, so I believe they're bringing in 12 teams in both cities to start. So the Eastern Conference will be housed in the Scotiabank Arena, home of the Leafs, and the Western Conference will be in Edmonton, where the Oilers play. The first round is going to be the teams that, based on points percentage, so the first round will be the teams that finished between 5 and 12. So the Leafs finished 7th, the Blue Jackets finished 8th based on points percentage. They'll play each other in a best of 5. And then you'll get those series down to a best of 16. Meanwhile, the top 4 teams in each conference will basically play a round robin with each other. And then once you get down to 16 teams, it'll be best of 7s, and it'll be a regular Stanley Cup, except that they're playing in the same city over and over again. So we haven't seen the schedule yet. It should be out soon, but I would imagine there'll be a game at 1, and a game at 4, and a game at 7, with allowances, obviously, for overtime. The interesting thing from a Maple Leafs perspective is that they have home ice for the first 2 games against Columbus, so they'll be in their dressing room on their bench. But for the third game, Columbus will have home ice. So Columbus will be in the main dressing room, and the Leafs will be on the visiting bench, something they've never, ever done in their history.
It is way too early, but how are the Leafs looking? They must get some benefit, even if they're in the visitors' locker room, to home ice. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, they got a familiarity with the building and they got a familiarity with the ice, but it will be an eerie familiarity. Like, it'll be their ice and nobody will be cheering for them because there'll be no fans in the stands. Like, it's going to be very, very strange. I'm not exactly sure how TV is going to handle it. I know that, through the training camp part, TV will experiment with what they're going to do, and then they will sort of get there as they go along. There'll be more cameras. But from players' perspective, if you're in your home ice and nobody's cheering for you, that's got to be a bit of an empty feeling. So instead of it being a home ice advantage, it might actually be a home ice disadvantage for them. They won't have access to everything that they normally have access to, and it's still their building. And they'll be denied. They'll be in the wrong dressing room at times. They'll be in the wrong weight training room at times. It will be unfamiliar to them, even though it's so familiar. So I'm not sold that it will be necessarily a home ice advantage.
Who else? This is one of those things. Who do you think is built to sort of pick up and potentially succeed in this type of tournament?
Well, the teams that I would look for, I actually think the Leafs are well positioned to do it. I would look for any of the teams that are in the 5 to 12 slot, because they're going to start off with games that matter right off the bat. They got to win 3 out of 5, and they're going to be going. The top seeds, the teams that you would normally consider to be the Stanley Cup favorites, and I would throw Boston and Tampa into that, and Washington, they're just going to play a la-di-da little round robin with each other, and the games don't really matter. They're just waiting to see who they're going to play in the next round. So I would argue that the teams in the bottom tier are going to be at a higher level to start the round of 16 teams. They'll be in better shape and ready to go ahead of the teams that are the top seeds. That said, it's a wild card. Like, who's got the most depth? Who can survive not only the grueling aspect of what the Stanley Cup playoffs have traditionally been, but who can also dodge the coronavirus bug? Because if you get the bug, you're not going to play.
Do you know anything about that in terms of testing? Is it going to be a daily thing? And, if someone's got it, are they just basically sequestered, or what happens?
So basically, the players are going to be tested every day. And anybody that comes into contact with players is going to be tested every day. So that includes like the hotel staff that cleans their rooms. Everybody involved in hub cities is getting tested. They're also getting temperature checks, and they're also getting questionnaires, as you do when you go into a grocery store, for example. It's going to be rigorous and intense, the testing. If a player tests positive, he's going to be isolated, and he'll be allowed to come back. I'm not exactly sure the time frame, but he'll be allowed to come back if he tests negative twice and the team doctor clears him. So I don't think that they will stop players from getting COVID, but they will really, really slow the spread. I think they're going to be like sort of on the ball here in terms of making sure that players who have COVID or test positive for COVID are isolated right away. Now, there's another interesting part of this, Raju. I've talked to a few health experts that sort of believe that the whole idea of hub cities is sort of more or less sound, that it's not really a risk to public health. But what would be a risk is if anybody along the line takes a shortcut. By that, I mean a player hiding symptoms, or a team hiding a test, or a league hiding a test. Let's say we get to Game 7, it's the Leafs against the Oilers in the Stanley Cup final, and one of the star players gets COVID. Is he really going to sit on the sidelines? That's the policy. That's what we hope. But let's remember, this is hockey, right? It's got a checkered past in terms of players playing through injury, playing through pain, playing through illness. I mean, Bobby Bond in this town is revered for playing on a broken ankle and scoring an overtime winning goal in the Stanley Cup. How many players would push themselves forward? How many would willingly do that? What pro league has ever really positively tested for performance-enhancing drugs and lived by or blood doping? You know, even the NHL's got a bit of a checkered history when it comes to its own concussion protocol. So how are they to be trusted really when it comes to COVID? I think the answer there is all of those previous examples are individual. You spread COVID, right? It's contagious, and you don't want to make people around you sick. So I think that's the check and balance there, but still, it's a leap of faith for some people to trust a league that basically doesn't follow its own concussion protocol to follow its COVID protocol.
Kevin, that's an excellent point, and one that I didn't even think about. The other thing with this is, what do you know about access and how you are actually going to get to do your job?
Well, there's the general feeling of what access will be, and then there's the very specific rules about access right now. So training camp is going to be the first thing that opens. The Leafs would love to have the beat writers like me in there, but the province of Ontario says we're in stage 2 and you can't have that many people inside at the same time anywhere. So at this point, through training camp, it looks like it will be teleconference, phone calls, that sort of access. We won't be able to even watch them necessarily train, which would be normal. I would imagine we'll get out of that and stage 3 will open up, and maybe at the end of training camp, we'll be able to be inside and watching them practice. But even so, through training camp and through hub cities, when the games are on, we will be able to only interview them by teleconference. We will not be in the same room as them. That's never going to be the plan. The media is not part of the hub. We will be invited in to watch the games if the province allows, but we will not get anywhere close to the players because the media is not part of the hub. So whatever reporting we do will be based on teleconferencing, watching the games. It's going to be a very different reality for a lot of us. The kinds of stories we're going to produce might be very different from what we're used to producing. We'll have to be creative because the limitations that make sort of storytelling easy will be gone. I'll be curious to know even how I respond to something like that. I've got a few ideas in terms of how a game report might look or how my reporting might look. I would imagine it will be more speculative or opinionated rather than just true reporting of he said, she said. It'll be a challenge on the media to tell these stories, that's for sure.
That's an interesting point, and it actually goes back to what you mentioned earlier about potential star player catching this and whether it will be divulged. Kevin, you know that I'm a former sports media writer at the Toronto Star, and this may get a little bit inside hockey, but you wrote a piece really recently about sort of the strangeness in how some outlets were reporting positive COVID cases, and in particular regarding Austin Matthews. Steve Simmons from The Sun sort of reported it, and then it seems like, you know, the two big franchises in town, TSN and Sportsnet, kind of immediately cowered away from discussing it. What can you tell us about that and what it sort of says about the media in this town?
Well, I mean, the newspapers are independent and the television networks are part of bigger conglomerates with strong ties both to the Maple Leafs, since they're owned by the same organizations as the Maple Leafs, and they are rights holders. TSN's a regional rights holder, Sportsnet's the national rights holder. What I do know is that the players don't want it reported because there's a stigma on it. The league has agreed not to report the names. TSN and Sportsnet, and to be honest, The Athletic, which is also an independent one, they have decided not to print the names of players that get COVID. We'll see if that holds true once the Stanley Cup tournament begins, because that's a whole other kettle of fish. But at this point, the league is not planning to announce names. And so far as I can tell, neither TSN nor Sportsnet are prepared to go on the record to use their reporting skills to out players with COVID at this point. That's a bit of hypocrisy as far as I'm concerned, because injuries are part of the game, illnesses are part of the game, and every other one has been reported. I know that if I come across information that's reliable that a player has COVID, the Toronto Star would support me in reporting that player's identity. Right now, the big reporters on the sports networks are quite happy to step back and let the players have their privacy when it comes to COVID.
Seems like the insiders are staying inside.
Well, they're using their skills for other matters, I would imagine.
Speaking of other matters, I'll be quite honest, I hate talking about collective bargaining agreements, and escrow is something that scares me. But the players did have some leverage here, and they got some stuff. What can you tell us that's new and interesting about this deal?
Well, it's kind of minutiae to some, but so the reason that there were 3 lockouts all along under Gary Bettman's regime is that he wanted to tie revenues to salaries. And he successfully did. And basically, players divide up 50% of hockey-related revenue. That's how it works. But because of COVID, the way that works is that a percentage of their salary is held in escrow. And at the end of the year, all the numbers are added up. And if they don't hit their hockey-related revenue targets, the escrow money goes back to the owners, and the 50-50 split is main true. And that's at about between 9 and 15% through the years. Well, as you can imagine, through COVID, without fans in the stands and no ticket revenues, hockey-related revenue has crumbled and will next year. What the players have managed to do is separate hockey-related revenue from salary cap. So there still will be escrow, but there'll be a limit on how much escrow the players pay. It gets smaller as the CBA goes on. So players will more likely get closer to the salary that they signed for. Imagine this. So you signed for $10 million, but escrow eats up 15%, so you only really get $8.5 million. Sounds like a lot of money, sure, but it's up and down the dial. The $1 million players only get $850,000. And that irks them because they want to actually get paid what they're going to get paid. As this collective bargaining agreement goes forward, they will almost assuredly get closer to the dollar value that they actually signed for. It's a win for the players in a very, very small way, but they managed to separate hockey-related revenue from the salary cap.
Okay, this is a big question. It's a double-barrel question, which journalism we're not supposed to do. But should we be reading anything into Vancouver dropping out of the hub city process? And 2, is this going to actually work?
My read of Vancouver dropping out, and Vancouver was probably the favorite among Canadian teams. As we talked about Vegas earlier, Vancouver was going to be the second hub. And yes, I think we can read into it. British Columbia obviously sort of led the charge on COVID protocols, on health protocols, on mask wearing, on just about everything in this country. Vancouver, British Columbia was on top of it first. Now, these hub cities are not leak-proof. There will be people coming in and out of the hubs, bus drivers, house cleaning staff, wait staff, cooks, chefs, that sort of thing. They'll be in and out, hotel staff in and out. And I think British Columbia didn't like the sound of that. Edmonton and Toronto had no problem with it. So I think BC is just drew a line in the sand and did not allow the NHL to cross, whereas Toronto and Edmonton kind of looked at the public health risk and sort of said, it's not really that big a risk with all the testing, so go ahead and play. So I think there's that. As for whether it will work, I talked to Jason Spezza a few weeks ago, and I think he had the best line. He thinks the hub cities will work. The problem is getting there. And we've seen the outbreak of COVID in the States and what it has done. I think hub cities will work for the NHL. I have more faith that the NHL will get its tournament done than baseball will play its full season. Baseball's plan looks like a mess to me, just everybody hopping around city to city around the world. You know, Major League Soccer's having its issues. I think basketball will face the same simply because there's so much COVID in Florida right now. The advantage for the NHL is that they've managed to pick two of the cities with the COVID under control to a large degree. Players will still get it, but I don't think teams will have to withdraw like the Dallas team did in MLS. I think they'll pull it off. I have more faith in the NHL's plan than in the other plan.
Kevin, this has been amazing for us. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think that we should know?
Well, one other reason that the NHL likes the two Canadian cities is the value of the Canadian dollar. People have called this a cash grab. There's no cash involved. The NHL is spending money to play a Stanley Cup tournament. They're contractually obliged to finish the season as far as their sponsors and TV rights holders are concerned. So what's in it for them is to finish the season, which gets them 1 year closer to a much bigger deal down the road with NBC. So the reason the Canadian teams had an inside track in being hub cities, the value of the dollar. The NHL is going to spend tens of millions of dollars on this tournament. So now they're spending a 75-cent dollar instead of a dollar. So they're saving 25% by playing in Canada. And that's the big reason why one Canadian city was always going to be one of the hubs. And having two there just saves them a boatload of money.
Kevin, that's an excellent point. I want to thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Anytime. Let's do this again for the Stanley Cup final.
Let's do it. Kevin McGran covers the Leafs and the NHL for the Toronto Star. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Raju Mudhar, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.